John Young, tonight on PBS News Weekend. Air strikes town Beirut, as Israel expands its bombardment of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Man, it was a night of terror. There is no solution except for the aggression to stop as quickly as possible. John Young, then, 1 year after the October 7th attacks on Israel, a mother pleads for the return of her son, who's being held captive by Hamas, and how Hurricane Helene's destruction is putting a spotlight on insurance gaps in America. Break, John Young. Good evening. I'm John Young. Overnight, Middle East conflicts. Israel carried out the heaviest bombardment of Beirut in its air campaign against Hezbollah. Massive explosions lit up the skies, and plumes of thick smoke covered the city. Civilians had been warned to evacuate their homes. They returned to ash and rubble. Denise Matra, displaced resident, through translator let all the countries talk to them and put pressure on them to stop the war and negotiate with each other. Let them deal with it. What is the fault of the people and those children who died? They left us with nothing, and we have become nothing. John Young, nearly a quarter of the Lebanese population has been displaced in Beirut. Some live out of their cars or tents. Special correspondent Layla Molana-Allen is in Beirut tonight. Layla, the Israelis have intensified both the scope and the intensity of their bombardment of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Where is a sense of where this goes from here? Layla Molana-Allen, they have. And what's really been clear over the last few days is just how much that bombardment has intensified. A week ago, we were looking at certainly in and around Beirut, a few strikes a day, and there were regularly warnings for those. That's really changed now. Last night was by far the most intense bombardment we've experienced here, at least 25 to 30 strikes throughout the night, incredibly intense strikes, shaking the whole city and flattening buildings across the suburbs of Beirut, but also further as well. Many people now packing up and running for their lives. Now in the south of Lebanon, where they've been hitting harder and harder, initially what we're hearing was there was going to be bombardment of those southern villages south of the Litani River, which is where the IDF wants Hezbollah to withdraw to. We initially saw that and those ground raids as well. But that zone has spread significantly. We're now seeing evacuation orders for cities all the way up the south of Lebanon, major population zones, people streaming up the border to try and get out of those areas. And really a lot of those southern towns have now been flattened, with seeing quite incredible destruction of those buildings. What's also happening, of course, in this fight is that the IDF is sending troops into the south of Lebanon to fight with Hezbollah troops on the border. They say, the IDF, that they managed to clear 250 meters of subterranean tunnel used for transporting weapons over the last couple of days. They've managed to seal those with concrete. And there's also heavy fighting happening on the ground. At least 8 IDF soldiers have been killed. Hezbollah says they have killed many more. The IDF hasn't confirmed those yet, but we're certainly seeing heavy fighting down there. John Young, you talk about people packing up and running for their lives. The head of the UN Refugee Agency has said that there is a major displacement crisis in Lebanon. Now talk about that. Layla Molana-Allen, well, as you said, John, at least 1.2 million people have been displaced. That is a quarter of the population of Lebanon. And what we're seeing with this displacement, of course, we know that at least 60,000 residents from the north of Israel have been displaced for nearly a year now because of those Hezbollah rocket attacks. But on the other side of the border, there isn't the capacity to house these people. Here in Lebanon, there's been a major financial crisis, which I've, of course, reported on for the NewsHour for 5 years here. The government is in complete disarray. There's no president. There's been no prime minister. There's been no government for 2.5 years. So they're not in a position to handle this. Every morning you see more and more people spread out across the streets of the capital, across the streets of the central southern towns. They are sleeping on mattresses. They're sleeping on blankets, small children in the baking heat. It's pouring rain at night. They've escaped with really just plastic bags full of whatever they could carry. There have been some shelters that have been opened, some by the municipalities and a lot by local charities, but they just don't have the capacity. People are finding many of those shelters closed, and of course, all that money is just coming from local charities. We're seeing an enormous scale of human misery here. And when these Israeli evacuation orders come out, people say, well, of course, Why don't they just leave to save their lives? They really have nowhere to go. They have short notice, but they really also just have nowhere safe where they believe they can be. They don't have the money for this. They don't have food. They don't have medicine. They don't have proper shelter. So we're seeing an incredible crisis spreading out across the streets of Lebanon here. And just a reminder that, firstly, there are no air raid sirens or bomb shelters in Lebanon. So when people are running from these bombs, they are running out in the streets and taking shelter wherever they can. And secondly, most people in Lebanon who are left here who have not managed to evacuate yet don't have foreign passports, don't have visas, they can't get out of the country. They are stuck here. John Young, and in cases like this, there's also governments, foreign governments trying to get their citizens out of the country. How is that going? Layla Molana Allen. So for many months now, Western governments and particularly the United States government and the UK government have been warning citizens, you should leave. Please get out while you still can. Please get out while there are commercial options. There have been warnings that this crisis was going to escalate. Now the United States says that they have managed to evacuate, help and assist 500 US citizens in the last couple of weeks. They ran a flight on October 4th where they managed to get 150 further people out. That was a flight that they ran themselves, and they say they've assisted nearly 2,000 people over the last few weeks with sea on commercial flights. Now we are reaching a point where those evacuation options are becoming much more difficult. There have been military flights for multiple Western countries that are flying people out. But the issue here is that right now the only airline flying in and out of Beirut Airport is the national carrier, Middle East Airlines. All other airlines have ceased to fly and they are flying through smoke. They're flying through shards of bomb fragments when they land at that airport. Because just to give you a sense of how close we are to these explosions, Beirut is only about 13 miles square, the center of the city, and about 40 miles squared, the whole of the wider city, including the suburbs. That airport is right next to these southern suburbs that are being bombarded every hour of the day. So that's what people have to get through. One of the roads, the old road to the airport, was hit yesterday. The main highway is still open. The airport's still functioning, but we don't know for how long. In 2006, when the war happened, Israel did hit that airport and put it out of commission. And because the two borders here are with Israel and with Syria, crossing them is not an option for most people. So we may soon see military aircraft carriers and speedboats coming and taking people to Cyprus and to Turkey from the ports here. That's the fear, that we could be seeing a mass evacuation by sea for anybody who hasn't left yet. John Young, the US State Department, said that they are working to get a ceasefire in Lebanon. Of course, they've been trying to get a ceasefire in Gaza for months without much success. What do you think the chances are of success here? Layla Molana Allen, there seems at the moment very little chance of a ceasefire. What we're seeing here, of course, is with the October 7th anniversary coming up tomorrow. The region is experiencing huge tensions. Everyone expects significant attacks on both sides of the border, and there's a general anticipation of Israel's response to Iran's missile attack earlier this week. The United States and other allies of Israel have advised them not to target Iran's nuclear facilities or major infrastructure to avoid escalation. However, Israel seems to be ignoring this advice, stating that they need to defend themselves and will do whatever is necessary. Israel claims the fight is against Hezbollah, but a lot of the infrastructure being targeted includes civilian areas. High-rise buildings and medical infrastructure have been hit, resulting in the deaths of at least 100 medics in the past few weeks, including 28 medics in just 24 hours. Hospitals, ambulances, and civil defense teams trying to rescue civilians have also been affected. This situation highlights the polarization in the region and around the world, where people hold very strong opinions about the conflict. There's a growing sense of dehumanization on both sides, leading to a disregard for the principle that civilians must be protected. People in the region feel terrified, believing that the international community doesn't fully understand the extent of civilian suffering in this escalating conflict. They fear that this could escalate into a brutal war, affecting hundreds of thousands of lives. On Israel's front in Gaza, a recent airstrike on a mosque killed at least 26 people. The mosque was sheltering displaced people near the main hospital in Deir al-Bala, and the Israeli military claimed it was targeting Hamas militants. Since the fighting began on October 7, nearly 42,000 Palestinians have died, with many casualties being women and children. In southern Israel, a woman was killed, and 10 people were injured in a shooting and stabbing attack in Beersheba. The attacker was killed by police, and the incident is being treated as a terror attack. Meanwhile, President Biden has ordered 500 more active-duty troops to North Carolina to help with cleanup efforts from Hurricane Helene. The hurricane has already claimed at least 230 lives, and many more people are still missing. Community organizers in Asheville, North Carolina, are working to provide essential supplies and help residents vote on Election Day. As recovery efforts continue, the Southeast is monitoring Hurricane Milton in the Gulf of Mexico, which is rapidly intensifying and expected to approach Florida soon. Amid these global issues, an Israeli mother, Edith Ohel, continues to plead for the release of her son, Alon, who was abducted by Hamas militants during the October 7 attacks. Despite the lack of proof of life, she remains hopeful and calls for a ceasefire to bring her son and other hostages back home. This ongoing conflict has created a deep sense of fear, loss, and a desperate plea for peace among those affected. You are not alone. From Japan to France, back to Israel, Edith Ohel has created more than 40 yellow pianos across 10 countries. Edith Ohel said, "A pianist, the commonplace, he gives to Alon, because when you play for somebody, you give something from yourself to somebody else. Music is his life, so music is part of him. So when you play for him, it will get to him somehow. That's what I feel." Nick Schifrin, voiceover, added that she feels him here too. That's the shirt he wore when he was kidnapped. Edith Ohel continued, "It's like he's sitting here, and he's playing in my mind somehow." For PBS News Weekend, I'm Nick Schifrin. John Young said, with at least 230 people dead across 6 states, Hurricane Helene is proving to be one of the deadliest U.S. storms in recent history. And property and economic losses are estimated to be as high as $250 billion. But the insurance industry says that as little as $5 billion of that is covered by insurance. After weather events like hurricanes, tornadoes, and flooding that climate change is making more frequent and severe, homeowners can get a rude awakening about what their insurance does and doesn't cover. Jeff Skleejmil-Milch, director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness at Columbia University, joined the conversation. He said that in western North Carolina, which has been hard hit by flooding in this storm, it's estimated that fewer than 1% of the households were covered by flood insurance. This means that many people affected by the flooding won't have access to additional funds through their homeowners or business insurance plans. Federal programs can provide some assistance, but it usually takes longer to come through and is typically at a much lower amount. This lack of insurance means people will have less access to financial resources compared to those who were fortunate enough to have insurance. John Young asked, "Could that also mean that there are some places that just won't be rebuilt?" Jeff Skleejmil-Milch responded, "Possibly, yes. Unfortunately, when we see disasters like this, we'll see areas that are high visibility get rebuilt very quickly, but it becomes a big challenge in terms of resources. It also means the recovery will be slower and more dependent on public or philanthropic assistance." John Young noted that beyond North Carolina, many households across the country lack flood insurance but probably should have it. Jeff Skleejmil-Milch agreed and explained that one issue is the flood maps used to determine risk, which often don't fully integrate current climate change data, especially for smaller riverine basins. He suggested that all homeowners, particularly those who can afford it, should consider flood insurance, even if they aren't in high-risk areas. He further explained that while flood insurance is sold by private companies, it is backstopped by the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. Around 95% of all policies are issued through the NFIP. This means that even though you buy it from a private company, the NFIP supports the program to help cover the risks. The National Flood Insurance Program is ultimately backstopped by the federal government, which engages with different tax dollars through the Treasury and increasingly through mechanisms like reinsurance markets and other private markets to help cover the risks. So, although you would still purchase this insurance through a private insurer, it is underwritten and ultimately supported by the National Flood Insurance Program. John Young asked, "What's this doing to the insurance industry with greater storms, bigger storms, and hurricanes in Florida, and wildfires in California. Jeff Sklegemilmilch responded, "To be totally honest, it's putting them under. Many insurers are pulling out of areas with high hazards. We've seen this in California and other wildfire-prone areas, as well as in markets like Florida and Louisiana. They face increasing losses due to storms and must pay out record sums. Without viable solutions, they find it difficult to continue operating in these high-risk areas. The result is significant pressure on the insurance industry. As the demand for recovery resources grows due to frequent disasters, insurers are finding it harder to stay in the market, making coverage more expensive or even unavailable to those who need it most." John Young pointed out that some argue that insuring these losses encourages people to live in dangerous areas. Jeff Sklegemilmilch agreed that it's a valid point and highlighted that the National Flood Insurance Program has faced short-term extensions since 2017. He acknowledged that artificially lowering the costs and risks of living in hazardous areas does create a moral hazard, where people aren't properly disincentivized from living there. However, Sklegemilmilch noted that many people already live in these areas. He referenced past attempts to adjust insurance rates to reflect the actual risks, which led to entire communities becoming uninsurable or too expensive to insure, causing property values to plummet. This economic impact affects individuals, communities, and businesses, making it a challenging issue to resolve. John Young asked what changes could improve the program. Sklegemilmilch suggested that instead of focusing on expanding the insurance market, efforts should be directed toward preventing disaster damage in the first place. He emphasized the importance of investing in building codes, disaster mitigation, climate mitigation, and emission reductions to prevent disasters from happening. He explained that even if 100% of the homes affected by Hurricane Helene were insured, the physical damage would still occur. Insurance can help manage the financial risk, but it doesn't prevent the damage. By preventing disasters, we could save lives, protect properties, and ultimately reduce the burden on the insurance industry caused by massive payouts. John Young concluded by thanking Jeff Sklegemilmilch of Columbia University for his insights, to which Sklegemilmilch responded, "Thank you." John Young then closed PBS News Weekend, wishing viewers a good week.